I think yesterday we got up to Amar Abaye, Hai Chamar Diyamo. It's on Lamed Tesam Aleph, 39.1. It's like in the middle of the page round. So let's get started. So Amar Abaye. Abaye said, Hai Chamar Diyamo, that donkey of the sea, shari, it's mutter, it's permitted. Torah Diyamo also. But if you have the cow of the sea, the ox of the sea is also. So Rashi explains that in Chulin, in Mesechus Chulin, we say that everything that exists, all animals that exist on dry land, exist in the ocean as well, in some form. So this donkey of the sea, I assume it's something like a seahorse, something like that. But it's probably not exactly as the way we know it, because that's not mutter to eat, but it's something along those lines. And whereas Torah Diyam is something that looks like a cow, looks like an ox in the ocean, but that's also Simonech Tamei Torah Tamei. The simon to remember this is that what's Tamei is Tar and what's Tar is Tamei, meaning a donkey is Tamei, it's not kosher, it's also to eat. But in the ocean, that's what's Tar, that's what's kosher to eat. Whereas an ox or a cow, which is kosher to eat, in the ocean, that's tamei, that's also to eat. So the simon to remember this is that's inverse. Now it doesn't apply across the board. It's not for everything that all animals in the sea which look like not kosher animals are really kosher, and all animals in the sea which look like kosher animals are really not kosher. Doesn't apply across the board. But at least for these two items, to remember it, this is a good way of remembering it. What's tamei is tar, and what's tar is tamei. Omar Avashi Shvar Nuna Shari Kodesh Nuna also. A Nuna is a type of fish. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but there's different species of it. So Avashi is saying the Shvar Nuna is permitted, but the Kodesh Nuna is also. Simonech, and the simon to remember this is Kodesh La Hashem. So the Torah, a lot of times, they're talking about hektish or things like that. It says that something is Kodesh to Hashem, it's sanctified to Hashem. And generally, something which is sanctified to Hashem, saying that's hektish, it's also to get benefit from. So a good way of remembering this is called Kodesh Nuna. That's also just like anything hektish. Igid Amri Kavar Nuna also. There are those that say it's not the Kodesh Nuna, but it's the Kavar Nuna. The Simonech, and the simon is Kivrei Ovi Kochavim. The word kever, the word kavar, means a grave. And the way to remember this is Kivrei Ovi Kochavim, which that when you think of a not Jewish grave, that'll make you that's a good way of associating the fact that kavar nuna is also to eat. Okay. The Gemara goes further. The Gemara says, Rabbi Kiva Ikal Ginza came to a place called Ginzak. Aisu Kamei Yahu Nuna Davidami Lichipusha. So they brought in front of him a certain certain species of nuna, which was similar to chipusha, which is a type of non-kosher fish. Chafie bedikula. So what he did was that he covered it in a basket and he blew into it, and some scales kind of blew a little bit. They rustled. So he was able to see that there really were very thin little scales on this fish. So Chazabei Kafe, the Gemara says he saw scales, Vashari, and permitted it. They were very thin. They weren't so easily determinable, but he was able to see them slightly. Of Ashi Ikal Tamdurio, I used to come nuna. They brought in front of him that nuna fish. Avadami Slufcha, which is similar to tzulcha, is another type of fish. Just it's something that looks like somewhat like a snake in the ocean. Maybe it's something similar to an eel. So Nakila de Yoma, he kept it for a day. He saw that it also had scales. The sharp, and it had Rashi explains simchi are like these very thin scales. The Sharian permitted it. We're I don't know if you have the place. We're holding by I don't know in the North Korea it is, but in the Gemara. Okay. Yeah.
What are you?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So Rav Ashi Ikla Lahu Asra. Rav Ashi came to that place. Aislu Kamei Isol Kamei Ahu Nuna, they run in front of him that Nuna, Davidam Shafar Nuna, that was similar to Shafar Nuna. Chafi b'masikli, he covered it also in what is this? In b'masikli chiyura, he covered it in this type of white background, and Chazabei Kalpe, he saw scales. I mean, the reason why he did this was because with the contrast of the white, it's easier, you could see the black scales. The contrast points, it makes them determinable. The Sharia ain't permitted it. Rabbi Barachana came to this place, Akar Agma, Karibule Sechansa. They brought in front of him Sechansa, which is the chilek fish, which we were talking about earlier, which is kosher. It doesn't necessarily have scales all times. It grows later. Shami Lahu Gavro Korile Bati. He heard that person that was calling the fish that was in front of him Bate, which that's the name of a not kosher fish. Omar, he said, Korile Bati, from the fact that he's calling it Bati, Shmami no, Dovar Tame Ispe. There is some sort of there is a non-kosher food mixed in here. I don't see it, but it must be that there is. Lo achamine. So he didn't need permit. But Safra in the morning, Ayimba, he paid closer attention to it. Ashkach be Dovar Tame, he found in it a non-kosher food. So he was really right because of his hearing of that person who's called it Bate, that tipped him off that there was really something non-kosher in there. He didn't eat it, and then he actually saw it. So Kari Anavshe called on himself, Lo Yu'una la tzaddik kol oven. It will not happen to a tzaddik, it won't occur to a tzaddik kol oven, any sort of iniquity, any sort of sin, that he was spared from having sin or having something not kosher based on the fact that this person called it Bati. If that person hadn't been there, had that person not been there, he wouldn't have known not to eat it. He would have ate it. It's a kosher fish. What's the problem? But because that person was there and called it Bati, therefore he knew not to eat it. So therefore, he's saying that this pasuk applies to him. Hashem orchestrates everything to make sure that tzaddik doesn't sin without paying attention. Hashem makes sure that the tzaddik's aware of something not kosher, that it doesn't end up in a situation where he sins unintentionally. Okay, let's see further. So we're going to the next part, discussing the next part of the Mishnah, the earlier Mishnah, Lamed Hey, that listing things which are usher to eat from a non-Jew, or mutter to get benefit from. So the next thing is vakorat shel chiltis, which is the grain of a chiltis. I'm not sure what chiltis is, but the Gemara explains my taima. What's the reason this is a problem? It's just a vegetable. What's the problem? The reason is because the guy cuts it with a knife, the non-kosher knife. This is what we discussed yesterday. That even though we know the Mar says that nosin tam lefgam, if a vessel or something enters taste into a food, but not for the positive, but for the negative, it's detrimental to the food to have this taste. It makes it taste worse. So even though it has a non-kosher tam, it has a non-kosher taste, it still would be okay because it's nosin tam lefgam. It's for the negative. So even though Mar said it's mutter, so what's the difference over here when you're cutting with a knife? And the stoma is that when you're cutting with a knife, it's not a ben yomo. And anytime it's not a ben yomo, it wasn't used that day, it's automatically going to be nosin tam lefgam. So the Gemara responds, Agav korpe decheltisa nechal yele shamnu nisa. That because of the sharpness of the cheltisa, so it sweetens the grease from the knife, and therefore, even though it wasn't used that day, it's like nosin tam l'shvach. It's like when taste is put into the food item for its benefit, because it seems like the science is that if it's something that's sharp, something like chiltis, and could apply to onions also. That's why onions are very complicated and kasher, so it's chopped up. But something that's sharp draws out the flavor of the knife in a way that makes it that's positive, in a way that's nosin tam l'shvach. So therefore, that's why the Mishnah says that chiltis is also, but at the same time, it's mutter ma'ano, there's no problem. Avdi Rav Levi have a kamaz bin chiltisa. The Eved, the servant of Levi, he would sell chiltisa. Kinoch nafshi Rav Levi, when Rav Levi passed away, also the kamei Rav Yochanan, the king of Rav Yochanan. They said to him, what's the halacha to buy it from him? Could we rely on this Eved even post Rav Levi dying. Amar Lui said to him, Abdu Shalchavar Areu Kachavar. The servant of a chavar. Servant of a chavar is a way that the Gemara refers to somebody who's careful, very careful about kashrus, very careful about tumah v'tahara, very careful about meiser and truma. So the eved of a chavar, the servant of a chavar, Areu Kachavar, he has the din, he has the halachic status of a chavar as well. And even though Rav Levi passed away, he retains that status. And therefore you could trust that the chiltis wasn't chopped with anything that, and any knife that was used for something not kosher. Avuna bar Minyuni zovan tchelosa a man she debase Rav Amram Chasida. Avuna bar Minyuni would buy tchelas from the people of the house of Rav Amram Chasida. Now tchelas is the blue that we put on, that is put on sets of strings. Nowadays we don't really do it so much. Some people do, but it's pretty rare. And there is a very easily accessible copy of it, which is made from a tree, a species of tree, and a lot of times people would sell it and would try to counterfeit it and try to sell this dye from the tree instead of real tchelas because it's much cheaper and they can make money off of it. So you have to be careful. You have to know who you're buying from, trust who you're buying from. So Rav Huna bar Yumi, he would buy tchelas from the people of the house of Ram Chasida. Also, Kamed Rav Yosef came from Rav Yosef, and he wanted to know, is that okay? So Lav Biyadei, he didn't know. Hagabe Chanan Chayta, he bumped into Chanan Chayta. Amar Yosef Anya Minole V'Didi Avodah. I myself, he responded to Yosef that I myself had a story. This Vinit Chelosa Me'anchi Debese Rav Noach Hu Rav Chia Bar Abba. I was buying tchelas from the people of the household of Rav Noah, the brother of Chia Bar Abba. Vasoy Lekamei Rav Masna. I came in front of Rav Masna. He didn't know what the halacha was. He didn't know if that's okay, if you could rely on it. I came in front of Rav Yehuda me Hagruna. Amarlino fell asliad. He fell into my hand. That now you need me. Now now I'll be able to tell you the answer. Haki Amar Shmuel. This is what Shmuel said. The wife of a chaver, which again, a chaver is somebody who is very careful about kashrus, very careful about tumah v'tahara, very careful about meiser and truma. Somebody who rely on his food 100%. So the wife of a chaver, arei kachaver, she has the same status as a chaver. You can rely on her just like you rely on her husband. And therefore, it's the same thing over here. All the people in the household, since they're the people of the household of a chaver, someone very reliable and trustworthy, you could rely on them as well. The Tana Rabbanon, as Tana Brisa, Eishes chaver harei kachaver. The wife of a chaver has the same halachic status as a chaver. Abdu shel chaver harei kachaver. The servant of a chaver, he also has the same status as a chaver. Chaver shameis ishto banav b'nei beisar ben chaskasa ad sheyachshedu. Let's say you have a chaver who died. So before we were talking about the chaver still alive, you're just doing the transaction with the people of their household. Let's say you have a chaver that died. So what's the status of their household? So chaver shemeis, the Gemara, the Brisa says that ishto banav b'nei beiso, his wife, his children, and all the people of his household, they're all in this harem mechaskasa, and they're all retain their status of being reliable ad sheyachshedu, until there's something that causes suspicion. But if there's nothing that causes suspicion yet, they retain their status of being reliable. So too, a chatzar, a courtyard which sells tchelas, so too, that's also b'chaskasa, that's also in its status of being reliable until it is found to be pasul. So we see from here is that for sure, when the chaver is alive, you definitely can rely on the people of the household. But B, even after the chaver is no longer alive, you could still rely on their previous status until an incident happens which makes their previous status questionable. Tanu Rabbanon, Tanu Brisa, Eishes Am Aretz Shenisi L'Chaver. If you have the wife of Am Aretz who got married to a chaver, I guess she used to be the wife of Am Aretz, and now she got married to a chaver. Bito Shel Am Aretz Shenisi L'Chaver, the daughter of Am Aretz who got married to a chaver. Abdo Shel Am Aretz, the servant of Am Aretz and Nimkar L'Chaver, they got sold to chaver. Kulam tzrichim l'kabel divrei chaverus. They all need to accept upon themselves divrei chaverus, meaning now that they transferred possession and they transferred where they are. Before we were saying that they retained their status. But now that they transferred, let's say the Eved transferred possession, so he needs to re-accept upon himself the divrei chaverus, which means that he has to accept upon himself that he's always going to make sure to eat all food b'tahara, not b'tumah. He's going to have to accept upon himself that he's going to do all the maestros correctly. He has to re-accept it to become reliable. Aval ba'at eishes chaver shenises la'amaretz. The wife of a chaver who gets married to amaretz. Chembito shel chaver shenises la'amaretz. The daughter of a chaver who marries an amaretz, someone who doesn't know halacha. Chen avdo shel chaver shenimkar la'amaretz. So to the servant of a chaver who gets sold to an amaretz, einam tzrichim lekabel divrei chaverus l'chachila. They don't l'chachila to begin with need to accept upon themselves the divrei chaverus, because they still retain their status from before. It's only when in the first half of the brisa where she was the wife of Amar, so the Eved belonged to Amaretz, who's unfamiliar with halacha, so then they need to accept upon themselves divrei chaverus. But if they came from a background being familiar, a background keeping the laws very carefully, so then they don't need to re-accept it upon themselves. Rav Yehuda Omer, so this is divrei Rav Meir. Rav Yehuda Omer, Rav Yehuda disagrees. Yehuda says, they too need to accept upon themselves the divrei chaverus l'chachila to begin with. Even once they transfer possession, once they transfer where they are, they also need to accept it upon themselves, re-accept it. The Rav Shimon ben Elazar said this as well. There's a story with one woman. She got married to a chaver. She was a good rebbetzin. She was tying the tefillin on the chaver's hand. That marriage ended, and then let's say the husband had died, and she got married to a moches, which is a tax collector. And this same woman, who was the woman who was tying the tefillin on her husband's arm, the husband who was the chaver, the Talmud Chacham, she's now tying kishrei moches, which Rashi explains are these receipts for tax collectors to give to people so that other tax collectors don't collect from them as well. And she was now tying that for him. Now, what's the problem with tax collecting? So Rashi explains that a moches, a tax collector, is stomach gasm, that minastam, without you can assume that he is not so honest. He cheats around a little bit, he steals a little bit, and therefore we see that this one lady flipped. She used to be a big rebbetzin. She was tying the tefillin on the chaver's hand, and now she's being involved with the moches, who's probably steals from people. So therefore, that supports the shita that we were saying before, is that you need to reinstate your divrei chaverus, even if you're an HS chaver. Okay, let's go further. Amara, Rav said chavis is an acronym. Tes beis yud saf. We'll see what it stands for in a second. Aser, it's aser. The chosim echad, when there's one seal. If it was left with a non-Jew and there's only one seal, it's aser to eat. You can't rely on the fact that he didn't switch it out. But champag, which we'll see what that is soon, is also an acronym. Mutter, it's mutter b'chosim echad. That's mutter with one seal. So what's chavis? Chalav, basar, yayin, chelas. So milk, meat, wine, and chelas. So all these things that if you left with a non-Jew with only one seal, asurin, they're also forbidden b'chosim echad with one seal. So we're on Matasan Beis now. We're on 39b. So that's what chavis is. Chiltis, murius, pas, kvina. That's champag. Chiltis, which is a type of fish we were talking about before, the sultanas. Murius, which is fish fat and brine. Pas, the bread of a Jew, and gvina, cheese. Those things are all mutter with one seal. So the reason is that by the things where we're concerned, the first four things, the chavis, we're concerned that the non-Jew is going to switch it out because they're expensive. Meat, chelas, these things are expensive, and therefore the non-Jew is going to want to try to forge a copy of the seal and take this instead. But these other things are either cheap, they're cheap. They're not. It's not worth it for the non-Jew to switch it out, to go through the effort of switching it out. So let's go further over here. It's a little bit complicated with the girsa over here. We're going to go with the way Rashi explains it. It seems like it's a machlokas, Rashi, Tosas. It might be other people just having machlokas as well, what the gear says. But we're going to go with Rashi, which I don't know how it has it in the art scroll, but Rashi puts these next words of Pasamai Nechoshla later, and he says to go directly to Varav, which is like 4 lines later. So we'll do it that way, and then we're going to come back to Pasamai Nechoshla. So let's go to Varav Maishna Gvino. So when I ask Rav who just said the statement, Maishna Gvino, what's the difference between cheese, Dilo Tarach, and Mizayev? That he doesn't go through the bother of forging a new seal to switch it out. It's not worth it for him. The cost benefit is not worth it. By milk also, he won't go through the benefit. Why is milk any different? Milk, Rab was saying, is also by 1 seal. Cheese, he was saying, is much by 1 seal. Milk also is not so expensive. It's why is it any different than cheese? So Rav Kahana said, no. Apik take out milk. But that's not what the ches is. Ches is not milk. You're right. Milk is totally fine with 1 seal. But instead, for the ches, enter in over there a piece of a fish which doesn't have a siman, doesn't have any sign of its kashrus. So over there, if you give it, it's kosher because you chopped it up. But if you give it to an anju with 1 seal, that's going to be usher. So Gemara says, 1 second. If that's really what the ches is, hainu basar, that's the same thing as meat. Why is it any different than meat? It's the same idea. You have a piece of meat. You don't know if it's you can't tell by how it looks whether it's kosher or not. You know it's kosher. You leave it by 1 seal with 1 seal, the non-Jew or phrase pushes it out. So to fish, what's the difference? So the Gemara responds, Trey Gavni Basar. No, it is halakhically it's the same thing as meat, but ultimately it's a different type of thing, and therefore we're just listing two types of meat. Shmuel says he doesn't. Just to clarify, Shmuel's not about to argue with Rav and Halacha. He just feels that a piece of fish is the same thing as meat, and therefore let's just take out the ches. So Shmuel says, Shmuel Omer Beis Aser. So there's also the acronym just without the ches, because he thinks that chalav would be fine, and the chatichas dog he thinks the same thing as basar. So Beis is aser b'chos mechel, the 1 seal. Machag mutter. So we're also taking out pas. Shmuel is taking out pas. He's taking out bread from things that are mutter. So we'll discuss that in a minute. So machag mutter b'chos mechel. That's mutter, the 1 seal. So what does that stand for? Basar yain chelas, meat, wine, and chelas asur b'chos mechel. They're also with 1 seal. But morios chiltis gvina. Machag means morius, the fish fat, kiltis, that the type of fish, the sultanis, gvina, cheese, mutar, and these things are all mutar b'chos mecha, 1 seal. So the Gemara, now let's go back to the lines from before. This is where Rashi says to place them. So the Gemara asks, and Shmuel, pass my nechoshla. You took out bread. Before Rav was saying bread is mutar the 1 seal, you took out bread, so what's there to be concerned about? If it's because we're afraid that the guy switched it. If pas akum was something that he baked, but kriya b'chamima made the idea. But if something's fresher or older, you could tell. That's easily determinable. So he's not going to do that. You're going to know they switched out. The chiti b'desari, it was equally fresh, but it's just a different type of grain, and he gets benefit that way. That barley is cheaper, and he's gonna take the wheat bread and give the barley bread. But now he made the idea. That's also that you could tell. So he's not gonna do it because you're gonna be able to tell it, switch it out. It's iki adadi. If you're gonna say that, okay, fine, we're concerned that he switched it out with a piece of bread that he baked, which is equal. It's wheat. It's the same level of freshness. But kivan dika chosim echad lo taracham mezayif. But since there's only 1 seal, so he's not going to go through. He's not going to go through the bother of forging a new seal for no benefit. If he was able to switch it out for barley bread or for older bread, fine, that's benefit. But it's exactly the same. There's no point of going through all that bother. So therefore, the Gemara feels that pass of a non-Jew with that pass that you gave to a non-Jew that you made, and Jew made with only 1 seal really would be fine, would be reliable. The Gemara goes further. The Gemara says, "L'Shmuel chatikas dog she'in basim and hainu basar." According to Shmuel, the reason why he takes out the ches is because a piece of fish which doesn't have a siman of kashrus, that's the same thing as meat. Trey gavni basar lo amrinan. We don't say that there's we're going to list two types of meat. No, it's all included in meat. It's all the same thing. So therefore, that's why it takes it out. Okay, let's go further. Tana Rabbanan ein lochin. Lochin is also an acronym. We're going to say that in a second. Ein lochin yamach machag v'soria. You can't buy it in Soria. Soria is a place which is right outside Eretz Yisrael. David conquered it. Unclear if it has the laws of Eretz Yisrael or not, but I don't know if that's relevant here. So we'll see. So the Brisa elaborates. The Brisa says, what does this acronym stand for? Lo yayin v'lo morius v'lo cholov v'lo melach salkondris v'lo chiltis v'lo gvina. You can't buy all of these things. You can't buy wine, fish fat, milk, melach salkondris, which the Gemara is going to explain, chiltis, which is a type of fish which is kosher, or cheese. Elamel mumcha, only from somebody who is we know to be trustworthy, someone who's an expert. But again, we're not talking about from a non-Jew here. I think just to clarify, over here we're talking about people. They really keep kosher themselves. Like in Soria is quasi Eretz Yisrael. They keep kosher themselves, but they're not makbid about lifting iver lo siti michshel. They don't care if other people do averas on their expense. They'll give people not kosher food. They themselves will only eat kosher food, but they themselves will only eat things that they weren't made by a non-Jew. But they don't care so much about lifnei iver, about causing other people to stumble, and therefore they will give other people food cooked by a non-Jew. So therefore, you can't trust them about any of these things unless they're known to be trustworthy, because it could be that it's not their wine or it's not their milk. They really got it from a non-Jew. But the cool on all of them, if you're a guest by them, it's mutter. If you're a guest by them, since you're sharing in the food that they're eating, so we trust that they're only eating kosher, good food, wasn't cooked by a non-Jew. Everything is good for themselves. They're just, when they give to others, that's what we're concerned about. But therefore, if you're a guest by them and you're sharing their food that they're eating, that's fine. That's mutter. Rabbi Shua ben Levi. This is support of Shua ben Levi. Amr Shua ben Levi. Shargalo balabais lebeso. If the Baal Bayis sent it to him to his house, mutter, it's mutter. That meaning, if he sent it from his house, from the food that he eats, it's mutter. This price is to support him. My timer, what's the reason? Baal Bayis the Baal Bayis, the person who lives in the house, he personally is not going to leave something which is mutter to eat, and eat something which is forbidden to eat. So therefore, when he sends to him food, he's sending him food from that which he personally is eating, and therefore you can rely on it. It's trustworthy because he himself eats from it. But if it's something that he doesn't eat and he's just selling, you can't rely on it. Okay, now the Gemara is going to discuss the melach salkondris. The melach salkondris, my melach salkondris, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Yehuda is the name of Shmuel. Melach shekol salkondre rome ochlanosa. This is a type of salt that all the salkondre rome, which Rav explains to mean all the bakers in Rome, they all eat this salt. So what's the problem with it? So the problem is that they would mix in innards of non-kosher fish, and therefore that's why it would be forbidden if you got it from a non-Jew. The Gemara is about to elaborate that a little bit further. So Tana Rabbanan, Tana Brisa, Melach salkondris, Shchora Asura. Black salkondris salt is asur. That's forbidden. Levana, but if it's white, muteres. It's mutter. You're allowed to eat it. Divir Rameir. These are the words Rameir. Rabbi Yehuda says Levana asura. White's asur. Shchora muteres. Black is mutter. So he's the opposite of the first Tana. Rameir says black's asur, white's mutter. Rabbi Yehuda says white's asur, black's mutter. Rabbi Yehuda ben Gamliel, Mishum Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel, Omer Zuvazu asur. They're both asur. So what's this machlokas based on? Amar Rabbi Barchana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Divrei Omer Levana Asura. According to the one who says the white's asur, which is Rabbi Yehuda, Kirvei Dagim Levanim Tmeim Muravim Ba. He holds that they mix in the innards of white fish, not white fish as we know it. That's kosher, but white space fish. So they would mix in the innards of white fish, which are not kosher, and therefore that's why it would be forbidden. But black is fine. There's no not kosher fish. They mix in that. The one who says black sausage are meir kirbe dogim shchorim tmeim murabba. They're the innards of black fish, black not kosher fish. They mix in it, but white they don't do that. And the divrei omer zuva zuasur, the one who says that both users they mix both. They do both. They're not specific. They do black and white. Amar Bavo Mishum Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel. There was one elder in our neighborhood. Is not referring to Jews, a non-Jew. He would smooth the face of the salt with pig fat. So that certainly would make it not kosher. And because of all these reasons, and that's why Melech Halkondris is also from a non-Jew. Okay, let's see further. So we're discussing the last line of the Mishnah. The last line of the Mishnah that we've been discussing for the past few daf, the past few blot, ended off by saying Harei Elu Asurim. These things that are listed are asur, but they're mutar ba'ana. So the Gemara says and the fact it's saying at the end of the Mishnah Harei Elu Asurim, that means there must be that the Mishnah is coming to exclude something specific. So what's it coming to exclude? So L'chizkiya, according to Chizkiya, L'miyuti b'yadua. So this is what we discussed yesterday. This machlokas we discussed yesterday. The machlokas Chizkiya Rav Yochanan about the case in the Mishnah of the pickled food items, which is the derech to put wine in it. So if it is it that's only if it's the derech to put wine in it that's mutter to get benefit from. But if you know that there's wine and you can't get benefit from it, that's Chizkiya's opinion. Rav Yochanan says no. Even if you know that it has wine in it, it's still mutter to get benefit from. So according to Chizkiya, Hari Ulu Asurim is coming to exclude Biadua. It's only where it's the derech. It's only where it's the normal way that to put in wine in the pickles. That's where it would be mutter to get benefit from. If you know, that's not included in this Mishnah because that's also get benefit from. Rabbi Yochanan says even that's mutter to get benefit from. So what's Harei Elu Asurim coming to exclude? Muti Morius Ugavinas Beis Nike Ustamach Rameir. So it's coming to exclude Morius, the fish fat, and the cheese of Beis Nike. And the Stam Mishnah is like Rameir. There's a Machlokas Rameir and the Rabbanon earlier on Chavtes and Beis about these two things. Morius and Gvinas Beis Nike, the cheese of Beis Nike, of a certain family. That is it Asur Bahana or not? Rameir says Asur Bahana. And this Mishnah, this Stam Mishnah, is going like Rameir and excluding those two things. So again, according to Chizkiya, Yadua, if you know for a fact there's wine in the pickles, then it would be Asur Bahana, therefore it's excluding that. Rabbi Yochanan says no, even there it's mutar ba'ana. So therefore must be coming excluding the Morius Gvinas Beis Nike according to Rameir. And the Stam Mishnah is like Rameir, that's what we say in general. Stam Mishnah is like Rameir. Okay, new Mishnah. And these things that are about to list are mutar to eat. Milk that a non-Jew milks from a cow, which in and of itself will be a problem. Non-Jew milk from a non-Jew is asur to eat because we're afraid he mixed in milk from a non-kosher animal. But if he's milking, if he's far away or a Jew sees him, that's mutar to eat. Vadvash, honey produced by a non-Jew, is mutar to eat. Vadav devonios and the clusters of grapes, even though they're dripping, they don't become fitting now to be mikabel tumah. In general, if something becomes wet, a fruit becomes wet, so that prepares it and makes it now eligible to be mikabel tumah. But it has to be certain liquids and it has to be in certain ways. So the Mishnah is telling us is that by the liquid that drips out of these clusters unintentionally, that does not prepare them to make them be able to be mikabel tumah. So this is the inverse of the Mishnah before. Pickles, which is not the derech, pickled items, which is not the derech, it's not the normal way to put wine in it, that's mutar to eat. The chometz and vinegar, which would have to mean that it was originally wine from a Jew, and then the non-Jew got it when it was vinegar from him. The Torah she'ena trufa, Torah is the Torah's fish, which is not chopped up. Earlier we said also when it is chopped up, we're afraid that non-kosher fish is mixed in. It's not chopped up, that's fine. The tzir sheish badaga, and tzir, fish brine, which has a fish in it, which the Gemara is going to explain is that that's a sign that if it has this fish floating in it, that shows that this fish brine comes from kosher fish. Came from a non-kosher fish, it wouldn't have this type of fish floating in it. But all shel chiltos, a leaf of chiltos, not not the grain chopped up. That was the problem because it absorbed the non-kosher flavor from the knife. Over here, it's just the raw form of the leaf. The zese guskos hamugolan, and olives which are placed in a basket and are oozing out by themselves. That's also permitted to eat. Rabbi Yossi Omer hashlochen asur. That shlochen, which the Gemara is going to explain, has nothing to do with the olives, is asur. And hachagovim abom aslulo asurim. Grasshoppers which come from the slulo, which Rashi explains means that's the basket in front of the storekeeper in the marketplace. So grasshoppers from a non-Jew, from his basket in the marketplace, that's asur. But min a hefsek mutar. But from min a hefsek, which means the storage place, if you got grasshoppers from there for the non-Jew, then it's mutar. And the reason why it would be asur is because the storekeeper drizzles wine on it. He drizzles a little bit of wine on it. But it's still, if it's still in the storage house, he doesn't drizzle it yet, and therefore it's mutar as long as it's a kosher grasshopper. Truma, and so too for truma. And the Gemara is going to explain where the line of the mission is. Okay, so let's get started on the Gemara. So Gemara says Tanin lo rabbanon. So this halach in the Mishnah, which said that if a non-Jew is milking an animal and a Jew sees it, that's mutar. So that's a support to that which is taught in Brisa. Yoshiv Yisrael b'tzad edro shel obi. A Jew can sit next to the flock of a non-Jew. The non-Jew can milk for him, or maybe low, and bring it to him. Nothing you can be concerned about. You could drink the milk that he brings. Hey, Chidami. Gemara says, 1 second. What's the case? If he doesn't have any non-kosher animals in his flock, so then Pshita, that's obvious. Of course, there's nothing to worry about. He's bringing you milk. He only has cows. Doesn't have any pigs. He doesn't have any non-kosher animals. So of course, it's permitted. If he has something which is tamei in his flock, so then why really is it mutar? It should be also maybe he really mixed in milk from the non-kosher animal. So the Gemara says davar tamei. Really, he does have a non-kosher animal. So why can you rely on the milk? When he stands up, he could see it. Even though right now he's sitting down, he can't see him. But anytime he stands up, he could see him. He also when he sits down, he can't see him. Now I just say, since when he's sitting down, he can't see the non-Jew. We should be concerned. Maybe he's going to bring a mix in non-kosher milk. Since when he is standing, he sees him. He's scared. The guy is frightened to do anything not out of protocol, because he knows that any time the Jew could stand up and look. And therefore, below Ma'arabe, he doesn't mix in non-kosher milk, because even though the non-Jew isn't watching him, he doesn't see him, but still, since he knows that any time that the Jew could see him, therefore he is scared. So this is pretty relevant in terms of where we know there's a lot of discussion of Chol Yisrael, Chol Stam in current times, and Rav Moshe, who has this famous heter, he gets it from this Gemara about Rav Moshe has a heter of Chol Stam based on the regulations of the FDA that you can rely on the fact that they're not going to mix anything in because of that. So that comes from this Gemara. Okay, let's see further. V'advash, the honey. So dvash my nechos. The Gemara explains why is there nothing to be concerned about. The Gemara says honey. What's there to be concerned about? If it's because we're afraid he mixed in wine, and wine of a non-Jew is obviously also Mr. Sorry, you would smell it. It would smell a little bit pungent, and you would be able to determine the smell. You know that's mixed in. If it's because it's bishul akum, it's cooked by a non-Jew. Honey could be eaten raw, and like we said, anything that could be eaten raw, there's no bishul akum for it. There's no prohibition of bishul akum if it could be eaten raw. If it's because it's cooked in the vessels of non-Jews, and therefore it's going to absorb the flavor, but no sin town of gamu, that's giving the taste for lifgam, for the negative, umutar, and that's mutar, and therefore there's nothing to worry about when it comes to honey. The next thing the Mishnah discussed was the clusters of grapes, about that even though they're dripping liquid, they're not fitting to be makabel, they're not eligible to be makabel tama now. So the Gemara says that Adav Devanio is apishim nafos, and they're dripping imbamishim hechsher mashke. There's no hechsher mashke, no preparation of a liquid that makes it now fitting to be makabel tama. Or many, the Gemara says, I'll ask a contradiction. A boatzer lagas, if someone harvests grapes straight into the the pressing vat that's used to press grapes for wine. Shami Omer Hochshar. Shami says, okay, now it is eligible Mikabel Toma. Hillel Omer Lo Hochshar. Hillel says, no, it's not. But Odile Hillel Shammai. But then Hillel came back and he agreed to Shammai. So you see, everyone agrees, even though you didn't press it yet, you didn't try to squeeze it out, but you just put it into the place where it will get squeezed out, and there's just by definition automatically some liquid comes out. That makes it eligible in Kabbalah Toma. That's against what the Mishnah is saying. The Mishnah is saying that if it drips, there is no extra mashka. So the Gemara responds and says, no, Hasam kabayile lemashka. There you want the liquid, and therefore, since you want the liquid, even though you're going to press it down, you're going to press out all the grapes for the liquid, even though you didn't do it yet. Therefore, this that happened by itself, that's going to make it eligible in Kabbalah Toma. Over here, you don't want the liquid. It just happened by itself. You want to eat it. You want to eat these clusters. You're not trying to press it out for the grapes, for the juice. I'm sorry. And therefore, even though some liquid came out, that's not what's wanted, and therefore that doesn't make it eligible in Kabbalah Toma. The Gemara goes further, and the Gemara is going to discuss the next in the Mishnah. Torah she'ena true for the Torah which is not chopped up. And then also the Mishnah discussed the tzir, the brine, which has a fish in it. So we're going to discuss both. So Tana Rabbanan, Tana Brayse, Ezu Torah she'ena true for what is Torah which is not chopped up? Kol rosh v'shedra nikra. So it doesn't have to be not chopped up at all, but it has to be that the head and the spine are still recognizable. And therefore you can recognize as the kosher fish that we know. Ezu tzir sheyesh badaga. What's brine as a fish in it? Kol shel kilbis achas or shtei kilbios shotetispo. Anything where there's one kilbis is a type of fish, and this fish, it lives in the brine of kosher fish. But if it had non-kosher fish, then if it was the brine of non-kosher fish, it wouldn't live. So if it has one or two floating in there, so then it would be mutter. So now we're on the top of 40, we're on the top of Mem and Aleph. Hashta kilbis achas Omer Shari. Now you're telling me that one kilbis in there, it's mutter, it's permitted. Shti kilbios mi boy. So you need to tell me two? Why are you telling me, one or two? If you have one, so then obviously two. Why are you telling me two? So if one's fine. So my response is no, lo kash is not a question. Kam b'psuchos, kam b'stumos. That it depends whether they're open or closed. If the barrels are open, if the barrels of fish pine are open, so then just seeing one is not enough. Because you could say it just happened to fall in, it was by accident, it fell in. If you have two, that's already not a coincidence anymore. And now you know that's the brine of a non-kosher fish. But if it's sealed barrels and you open one up and you see one kilbis in there, you know it didn't just fall in by accident. And therefore you can rely on it to say that it's kosher fish brine. Okay, the Gemara goes further. Imma, it was said, Rav Huna Amar Achite Rosh V'Shidra Nikra. It has to be that both the head and the spine are recognizable in order to eat the taurus. Rav Nachman Amar O Rosh O Shidra. It can be either the head or the spine, either one. That when we said that to eat the taurus has to be Rosh V'Shidra Nikra, the head and the spine have to be recognizable. It can be either one. So, sorry, a second. Rav Nachman Amar, right? So this machlokas whether it has to be both or either. Most of Rav Ukva Bar Chama has a question that there's a brisa which says of a dogim by fish, anything which has fins and scales. So Rashi explains that this is really a question on both of them. That both of them are saying they're arguing about specifically whether one's sufficient or you need both. But really, both they're saying is that you could determine whether a fish is kosher based on its head and its spine. But what do you mean? But we know that the way to identify a fish is, and it sounds like the only way to identify a fish is if it has fins and scales. You can't identify a fish based on looking at its head and its spine. So the Gemara responds, Amar Bai Kitanihi, when was that taught? The Ara Upamudo the Domorishayu Litmeim. That's taught by certain types of fish, which their heads look similar to not the heads of non-kosher fish. Therefore, you're not going to be able to figure it out based on that. And therefore, the only avenue to figure out if they're kosher is the fins and scales. And that's where that brisa is talking. In general, you could identify whether a fish is kosher based on its spine and its head. This machlokas is only regarding dipping in the brine. But for the fish themselves, everyone knows it's also actually rosh v'shidra nekra until both the head and the spine are recognizable. Even the Manda Omar, which is saying that either one is sufficient, that's only to dip. And what's the difference? So Tosfos explains is that when it comes to the brine, even there is a little bit of non-kosher fish brine mixed in there, it will become batal. and therefore that's enough. But in regards to the actual guf, that doesn't come batal, because a burial, since there's a complete item, that doesn't come batal, and therefore, if everyone agrees, you need a higher standard of recognizing that it's kosher. You need to recognize both the head and the spine. Amar Abzera, Miresh Hava Mapilna B'tziron. Originally, I would dip it. I would dip it in the brine. I would dip my bread in the brine. Kivan the Shaman Lahada Amar Yehuda Mishmedu Ula. When I heard that, which Rabbi Yehuda named Ula said Machlokas the table B'tziron. The Machlokas is only regarding dipping in the brine al Begufon, but for the actual fish, Dibra Kol also. Everyone else is also Ache Rosh Vishidra Nicker. So both are recognizable. B'tziron Nami Lo Mapilna. So he was very machmir. And you go a step beyond the Iker din, and therefore, before when he thought that everyone agreed that dipping is fine, even if you only recognize one, then he would dip. But now that he learned that the machlokas is by the tzir, so then he by the brine he wouldn't dip either. Omar Papa Allah is that you need to recognize that both the head and the spine of every single fish. You can't just say let's have a batch of the taurus. You can't say, okay, I recognize one, that's enough. You need to recognize every single one to rely on it. So the Gemara asks, Meisvei, simin, you have a piece of fish which have a simin, bein bekulon, whether they all have a simin that's kosher, bein mixason, whether some of them have a simin that's kosher. Even 1 out of 100, kulam mutaros. They're all mutar. They're all permissible to eat. From the fact that one has kosher simanim, you can rely on the rest of them. There's a story with one non-Jew. He brought some sort of container of pieces of fish. They found a siman of it being kosher in one of them. Bitter of Shimon Gamliel is a gar of kulu. He matter of Shimon Gamliel. He mattered the entire basket, the entire container. So we see that just seeing a siman of kashrus in one of them, that's enough. But Rav Papa said that you need to recognize every single one. So Targum Rav Papa, Shavos. This is talking about when they're equal pieces, meaning that you could tell from the pieces there used to be one fish. So if you could tell the siman of it being kosher by one, you could rely on all of them because they all used to be one fish. So Gemara says, if so, what's the chiddush? This is obvious. If they all used to be one fish, that's obvious. So now the same. I would have said we should be concerned. Maybe it just happened to be that they all look the same, and it looks like they all came from one fish, but it's really not. Mash Malon, they were not concerned about that, and therefore you could rely on it. But if it doesn't look like it comes from one fish, then you really need to recognize a siman in every single fish. Okay, Yashakar, have a great day.